You can. Thank you for joining us. So we have a quorum of the committee, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Andrew, I shared before we officially started that because of the Cleveland High School transportation hearing this evening, we are going to try and wrap up in an hour, which we don't have anybody sent for public comment, do we? Which I think should be doable. I'll let you get back to whatever you're doing. And we're not making any sort of decisions this meeting or taking any actions. The purpose of the meeting is really to set the framework for the local option levy and a recommendation from the committee. And so what I put together with staff was some base level documents, so everybody has as sort of for not just for this meeting but also for going forward. Do you have access to those, Andrew?
Yep, I do have those. Those are what's in board book, right?
Correct.
Yep.
And I mean, one of the agenda items will be like, what are some other things other people will want at the next meeting? Or at the next couple meetings, what else do we need? But I thought this was like a good foundational sort of background for committee members of like what was in the last levy, what we've done so far, and then sort of like what the legal requirements are. I initially had tried to get Carol Samuels for this meeting to provide background information on what will probably be an important early conversation for us to have. Or information session, which is around the dollars, what potential there is to increase our receipts, because there has been a discussion, at least at a very high level by the board, on what the possibilities were and like what kind of space we have within the law. Carol wasn't available for this meeting, but she is available for the next meeting, which will be on November 8th. So that'll be like another piece of information that we have, and I'll have an opportunity to ask her questions about a highly technical subject, but important because it will dictate about whether we can
go for more.
Go for more this year, and that could also impact our recommendation on timing if there's some things that would need to happen before that. So before we get started, any questions about the agenda or any of the frame up?
Not for me.
Okay. So the first agenda item is, again, just background information. It's a matrix that has the amount of money. So this is this local option, 5-year option started in 2019. We've got 3 years of receipts to date. And so this is just a chart that basically shows the receipts from our local option, which seem to be a little bit lower than we predicted initially in our when we referred it. And then what percentage of, not percentage, but what the overall district operating budget is, so kind of how it fits within that. And then how many FTE it purchased, and then our total FTE. Again, it's just sort of giving us a reference point of, you can see it's about 10%, right now about 10% of our operating budget, and those are FTEs, those aren't just teachers, so is that right? Or are those teaching FTEs?
I think I asked for all.
Don't we have 6,000 employees? Sorry.
Yeah, somewhere.
I think I asked for all, so I can clarify that.
Because this looks more like a teaching number, maybe, which would be a third.
And that's what Alberto said in his email, that we can look at it like about a third.
So let's just get that clarified. So anyway, it's just to show like here's the importance of the local option and where it fits. Does anybody have any questions about this document or any other sort of like?
Can I just tell you what that email he said from Alberto, just so for context? He said, when we prep for the FY23 report, we'll be leveraging last year's data, although a good rule of thumb to understand the support provided by the levy is the 1/3 rule. As an example, when thinking about the current teacher FTE at a school, if 27 teachers, a third, 9 of them would be paid by the levy.
Yeah, so we should just clarify this column, or like retitle the column.
I can
just
find out.
sounds like teaching positions.
Yeah.
Anything, Gary or Andrew, that would be helpful in terms of our larger frame for information on the budget that you'd want?
No.
Maybe it might be useful on this to have a column that is what we projected.
Versus real
Pardon?
numbers versus real numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit less, and I guess I'm interested, is like, if we're trying to maximize this. Hello. Do you need materials or? Thank you for coming. We're just saying this is primarily like a information setting for like a framing meeting, to set up our future meetings for making a recommendation to the board.
Fantastic.
I guess, Julia, my only question on that is do we need the projection? I mean, projections are always wrong. So, I mean, when we went out with the levy, it would have been based on, property taxes at the time, home values, there's all kinds of variables. The actuals, I think, are really what's important in terms of what we've collected. Is there value just to go back to the projections, or?
Yeah, I get, maybe you're putting a sharper point on why it is, like, what the question should be. Maybe it's not like what were the projections, but so for example, if we thought we were going to get more this past year, is there something we did that resulted in us getting
Or
a lower rate? I mean, I don't know if it's compression or
yeah, I don't know.
is it?
Could it possibly be as far as adding that extra line of our projection? Could that be used as an argument of maybe why we need more? Because we didn't get enough? I don't know, I'm just
Yeah,
asking.
it's
It's also, did some people not pay their property taxes?
Yeah. I'm just saying unless we can use it for something, I'll be kind of skeptical of putting it on there unless we can use it to
Okay.
to get it.
I guess I can ask Carol, like, maybe at our next meeting, because maybe that's a question for next week. Hold that question for next
Okay.
meeting. We don't need to add it to the column. So you also have the CBRC reports,
Yeah. let's do that.
which are for the last 3 years. One of the things that we don't yet have available is each of the CBRC reports has a document attached to it that is the general fund local option levy staffing by school. It's this document. And when we went to put this together, we discovered that we only have the 1920, the 2021, and then the 21-22 is, when are we going to have that? It's not yet prepared.
It'll be used for this year's CBRC report. I don't know when it will be finalized. I can find out.
Yeah, that would be good to just, because unless it's just an accounting exercise. It's good to have all those three. So one of, like, just setting ourselves, our conversation up for the community of like, hey, Chief Joseph, in 1920, you received, 6 FTE that were funded by the local option, and you can go through that. So it'd be great to have that. If we have a 5-year levy, but we only have 2 years of data, I think that would look somewhat incomplete. Any questions about these materials? Again, this is like base documents. Or just background information. Okay, maybe we get out of here earlier than that. Then you also have in your packet a document that's the Portland Public School District Measure 26207. It looks like this. Share.
Yeah. Just figured.
But this is like what the what the committee ultimately, like the work product that's sending it to the board with the recommendation. This is what we'd be approving and then sending to Multnomah County elections. So it's pretty straightforward. It's not, unlike the bond that generally is more complicated. This traditionally has been pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and it wouldn't likely change. I mean, it would, whatever the rate becomes and we decide on as a district, it's still going to be about maintaining teaching positions and classroom supports. It's like that is going to be the same. So the language may get tweaked a bit, but kind of the same end goal, I think.
Yeah. And we probably need to have a discussion like that, an agreement that that's what we want to keep it for. Any questions about this?
No, that makes sense.
Can it be used for anything else?
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
it can be used for.
The wheels start turning.
I mean,
I think within reason, I'm not this is a Carol Samuels, maybe Liz question, but
operating
it
expenses.
has to be operating, and I'm sure there are limits, but not, it doesn't have to just.
Do you know the answer to that question, Andrew?
Yeah, it's just limited to what is in the explanatory statement in the ballot language. So no, there's no limitation that I'm aware of from an operating expense standpoint, but it needs to be clear what the levy's for. So we can't say it's for one thing and then turn around and use it for something
Right.
else.
But
Yeah.
we can add, if we want to add stuff in here that it can be spent for.
Yes.
There was actually a long conversation
About classroom supports last night.
in 2019 about the third bullet to provide support such as reading specialists for struggling students. I mean, the other limitation is maybe more of a political limitation. So if you said, we're going to maintain maximum flexibility and we're not going to say what it's for, like that's a harder conversation with voters. Like
Becomes a slush fund.
right, because it's so that's more of a.
So essentially what we're looking at is whatever we put in here, we need to be able to sell to the voters. So
Correct.
it doesn't matter what I put, well, I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but if I feel like, or if we believe that the voters will buy it, meaning that they will vote for it, then we can put it in there. But it's a risk because if we put something in there that we believe voters will go for, and then all of a sudden they say, oh, absolutely not, then we lose.
We
Okay.
we do some
have to
research
vet
in
teachers.
advance.
I'm just saying, I just want to understand the playing field.
But
Yeah, that's you nailed it. I mean, let me put a finer point on it. Money for teachers is very, very popular. Money for drivers, for board members, so that we can get back and forth to our meetings, going to be significantly less popular. Still
So
legal,
I'm not getting my 63 Lincoln out of this.
still legal, but very,
Expense anyway. I mean, where it would matter is if, for example, the board shows something that's not currently funded in the budget, and you'd have to think about in the budget, you still have to pay for the teachers. So if say the committee or the board, it's ultimately the board's decision. We're just making a recommendation to
Okay.
the board. But say the board decided, we think there should be a reading specialist in every school, and we want the local option to pay for that, and we're gonna put it in here. Like, we would need to do that, like, but you say the money's gonna be used for, you need to do that. But that's that's something new that's not currently in the budget, and that would have like a budget implication, because you still have to pay for the 851 teachers that we paid for this year. Because you're not gonna get 851 if you're getting reading specialists for every schools, so.
So is there a cap? I'm assuming there's a cap on the amount that we're gonna get. So we look at this $199 for every $1,000 assessed tax value. That's basically the pot of money we have to use.
If you choose to do a straight renewal,
Right,
which means that taxpayers won't see an increase, right? Or at least inflationary they would, but,
Right.
you know, the only, that's when it gets tricky and where we have to bring in Carol, because she
This
can
is
do all
the
the.
conversation we're gonna have at the next
well,
meeting.
no, I understand about
But yes.
raising this, but I'm just saying, but whatever that number is, that's the total amount we have, and if we add something else, it'll be
have
kind
to
of
work within that.
deducted from that amount. So
Yeah.
if we say we want to, I don't know, drivers for PPS board members,
Yeah.
that will get deducted from that overall amount.
In
Okay,
a
gotcha.
Salem, we'd call that a carve out, right? We'd be carving out from
Gotcha,
the
from the
base
same money.
number that we've been,
Okay.
yeah.
You might be getting drivers, Andrew.
And the car.
In the car, right? In the car, right?
I'm trying to think, so one of the
Okay,
things
I get it.
here, for example, it says, over the past 5 years, the levy has funded an average of 825 teaching positions, and if approved, the renewed levy is projected to maintain that average over the next 5 years. So that's like a commitment to the voters that, like, at a minimum, for, at least for this levy, that it's gonna fund
Somewhere around 825
an average of 825
Over the course of 5 years.
each year.
each year.
Each year,
Yeah.
okay.
And we've been averaging, at least these last couple of years, we've been averaging more than that anyway. I see here 908, and then for 1920, and then for 2021, 873. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think we dropped the number of teachers here because we added this providing supports, so recognizing there could be things that the district would budget for that aren't
Classroom teachers.
classroom teachers.
Gotcha.
Because I want to say it was 900 in the previous
Yeah,
levy.
around that. That's what I remember.
Okay, so this is like the end product. This is the committee's deliverable, ultimately, or a recommendation on what would be in here.
You make it seem so simple. I know how much work it is to get that one page done.
I remember we had that whole meeting
Uh-huh.
on it was over at
It
Franklin.
seems simple.
It always does.
Yeah.
Okay, so then for, as part of the local option, and the referral it talks about, there is a citizens committee that there's an independent citizen oversight, which will review the expenditures to verify the funds are used as approved by voters. So that's the CBRC. And so what you have in your packet, and again, these are like just base materials for the committee's work, are the 3 CBRC reports. We know from past ballot measures and survey work with the community is that independent review by CBRC is important to community members. That like somebody else is reviewing what we've done, how we spent the money, and to see that it complies with what we told voters.
Is that a legislative thing we have to do, or that's something we chose to do?
That's an
We chose to do because, again, there's a lot of community support for that. So again, finding this mix of, are we going to buy teachers or drivers for board members? And then who's going to verify that we have done what we said we were going to do?
Could that?
people like accountability.
Yeah, no, I get it. Can that be done by our auditor?
That's a good question.
I think you're talking about accountability, right? Like if we tell voters, and the reason why I'm talking, what I'm looking at, rather the independent citizen review oversight piece, because like when I was on the CBRC stuff, they really didn't go over much around the levy stuff except, well, how many teachers is it? But it's pretty cut and dry. We got 825 teachers. Out of that, then it's done. So my thought process was to make it easier on them so they could actually go into the budget more. If this could be done by our auditor, which it should be a real simple audit. Well, yeah, they did this. Here's the budget. Here's the amount of teachers. We satisfied, what we told the voter. But just a thought.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think we should consider it. There are rules for what around internal auditing that they, like professional standards, so we could find out whether that's something that they could
Is
do,
it
and then
still
whether we want
independent
to do
if it's
that.
internal?
Pardon?
Is it still independent if it's internal?
Well, they,
I
yes,
know
because
there's
that's
because of the standards, because it's literally they have
so
to.
that's a question. We can do, because I think you're right, the CBRC report is more about the general budget that we're building versus the, like, review the expenditures. Then there's a document in the potential election dates. The header is levy referral election dates. Because this was a 5-year levy that was approved in 2019, the tax receipts, we have a number of options on when we could go out. We could recommend to the board that we go out to voters. So this would be, again, like a committee recommendation to the board. So the election options are next May, November of 2023, May of 2024, November of 2024, and May of 2025. So even if you went as late, which I would not recommend, as late as May 2025, you could still levy the tax in time in which there would be no disruption of tax levies to the district. And I have a whole host of reasons why I wouldn't recommend it, but it's always, so just this takes, for example, a 2011 bond. Things don't always pass, and you might have to go back out again. So you wouldn't want to have your last levy be the one that, say, for a variety of reasons, you waited till May 2025 and then it didn't pass, then you would have a disruption, a very significant disruptive event.
Be late.
Yes. And so there, more of our committee discussion when we get into it about dates is, there are pluses and minuses on each of these elections. I think I would,
Which?
the May 24 and November 24. So November 24, just, I think we should sort of circle, and unless things change, that would be normally the ideal time we'd go out for the next bond.
Is that a presidential election year?
Mm-hmm.
Big turnout.
Did that work in our favor? Bigger turnouts versus?
I think in Portland it does.
I want to make sure that we made that distinction, because Julia just said that's the plan for the next bond, not the levy.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. You're right. Yes.
And what I should say is that the reason I raised the bond is I wouldn't recommend having both a local option and the bond on the same ballot. So.
Oh, so the bond is in 24?
I mean, that's
Proposed.
generally, our next 4 year cycle. But we can have more conversation about it, but we'll have, in there, we'll need to have a election to renew the bond as well.
Usually the bond goes out on the election year's presidential election cycle, which would be November 2024.
Right.
That
And
would be 4 years from the
years.
last time.
Gotcha. Okay. So basically we're looking at the 3 prior, either
So
23
May of 24 or November 23.
or May of 23.
And they're all gonna have different,
Are we ready for May of 23? Given all the stuff that we're experiencing right now and all this, we're gonna have the teachers. I mean, are we really ready for?
well, I think these are some of the things, the recommendations, the committee, to take into consideration in terms of recommending to the full board.
Yeah,
You're thinking about it the right way, I think.
because we gotta make this make
Yeah.
sense. It doesn't. If we bring it out too soon, I mean,
That's really in negotiations right now.
That's-
I don't know how did that play a part? Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Like, is this really when we want to do this? I mean, May. I mean, I'm thinking more like November to give us a longer, a better runway.
Well, we could still be in negotiations in November. I mean,
I mean, I guess, but either way, I would just assume whether we went in May or November that they would be in for it because it's their teachers. I would just.
And realistically, if am I mistaken in that if we don't get this, somebody's getting fired?
what do you mean?
Like, if we don't get the levy when it's time for
I
it to
think
come
if
up,
Well, if you don't get it by May 2025,
then we're in a really bad situation.
But I think you didn't, did you say that I'm not sure if I heard you say you could go out again, so if it fails.
Yeah,
the-
so
oh yeah,
don't
if it goes,
May,
so for
we can do
example,
it.
say we went in November of 2023 or went in May of 2023 and it didn't pass,
We could go
we
back
could
in
go back. I
November.
mean, like,
And
okay,
try again.
why didn't it pass?
Right.
But if you waited till that last option, then
Yeah, you
that's
wouldn't
what's
have
risky.
another chance.
Yeah.
so if we get, I just want to, like, I'm a brass tacks type person. If we get to the end of this and we haven't got it,
Yes.
these teachers are going home. Period. Cut and dry. They're going home.
If by May 2025,
We don't have a levy tax in place, some money coming in, teachers are going home.
I'll say, having been on the board in years in which
I just
It's a yes.
Okay, that's all. That's all
it
I
says
need.
yes.
It's a
Okay.
yes.
Well, you
I
can
mean, because we have to be that cut and dry when it comes down to it to explain to everybody else when they talk. Because I feel like what's going to happen is people are going to try to leverage this over us, right? They're going to try to leverage this, hang this over us. Well, I'm not going to do this. Well, then you're going home. I'm not going to help you. Well, then you're getting fired. I mean, because you don't have a job. All of y'all don't have a job without this. Somebody got to go home because I ain't paying for you. So, I mean, I think when we start looking at it,
Well, there's no money to pay them.
right.
It's
So
not
that's
like
what I'm
you're
saying.
not
So
paying money. Yeah.
don't hang this carrot over my head like if you don't support me, then I'm not going to vote for your levy. Well, then you just fired yourself. I hope you're happy with it. And that's how we have to be that cut and dry. We have to be that straightforward because it is what it is. I mean, do we have the money to pay them if we don't get the levy?
well, it
Not
depends
unless
on,
we have a constitutional amendment that reverses Measure 5.
Right.
Yeah.
So then we need them to go to Salem. So in addition to all of this, we need to talk to them about going to Salem. So we all need to get busy working. Don't just put this on me and think that all the world's problems are my own. Everybody got to carry some of the weight. I just need to make sure that I was clear on it because, again, like I said, I'm a brass tacks type of guy. Let's just.
And we've
It
had
is
a
what it
history
is.
in Portland. I mean, these have generally passed by good margins.
Well, good job.
Right?
Let's keep it up.
Who doesn't like to support education?
Well, let's not let
However,
this be the reason not
we
to.
can't, we want to not get too comfortable with that. We got to work, there's a campaign, there's a whole,
Oh,
and we've always had a consensus on when
yes.
we've gone. We've always built that. And so we have a agenda item on like what stakeholders do we need to reach out to.
Okay.
Hey, Julia, I have a couple of
Okay.
technical questions on this document. I just want to make sure. So it says, I think in that second paragraph, sorry, let me pull it up. A levy renewal could be on the May 2025 ballot, still have time to levy a tax for 25-26. But I think that means a levy for tax year 2025. Because again, tax years are calendar years versus our fiscal year. Because and I was surprised to read this, and just a clarification, the sentence up above, what we collect in November of 2024 actually funds the following school year budget. And I actually didn't realize that. So and that applies for every year. So I assume what we're collecting next month, right, November of 2022, is not actually funding the current school year. It's going to be funding teachers in next school year. Okay. So anyway, it's a little bit of a technical point, but I think that sentence
Okay,
should
so
be.
I want to make sure we get it accurate because we all this came from Carol, and maybe we changed. Maybe that's the one that Carol had.
I think that was the one.
So you're saying that instead of saying fiscal year 25-26, we say tax year 25-26?
I think so, if I'm understanding the document. But related to that, and it's a question we can go back to Carol to clarify. I believe if you levy the tax in May of 2025, it is retroactive back to January of 2025. That is allowed under tax law, but it is sometimes a harder sell. So again, I know we're not talking about 2025 as a very serious option at all, but I mean, I just want to be clear that those retroactive taxes add an extra layer, an extra complication. The other thing I would want to really make sure, and again, I don't think any of us want to wait that long, so that's why I say this is a pedantic point that we don't need to spend a lot of time on. But I also believe if we waited that long, there would potentially be a question of whether the Secretary of State would allow us to say it's a tax continuation versus a new tax, even though the last taxes are being, collected in November of 2024. If we went in 2025, it's the Secretary of State who gets to decide whether we can say it's a renewal of a tax or a new tax. And I wouldn't want to get to that point and think it's going to be talked about as an extension, a continuation, but actually it would be new. Again, don't need to spend a lot of time on that. The last thing I would say though is that third sentence, regardless of the election selection, the new local option would not be levied, I think, same thing there, until the 2025 tax year.
Okay.
Which means it would expire. So anyway, it's small points, but I just wanted to.
Those are good.
clarify.
Yeah, no,
Tax year.
there's some highly technical and like non-intuitive
Mhm.
things about this.
Yeah.
So
And then
I need to be
the other
really
thing I would,
clear with people.
to the more important conversation y'all were just having, I think the dynamics. If we're thinking about 2023, there are pros and cons for everything, right? And so I think 2023 in May, it is pretty quick. We would need to get our act together pretty quickly and get something on the ballot. I think there's some advantage because we will be in bargaining. I think we're still going to be in bargaining next fall as well. So I think either May or November next year, that dynamic's the same. But there's an interesting issue with the legislature, and I actually could make an argument on both sides. On the one hand, if we are making an argument during the legislative session, sort of combined with a fiscal ask in Salem for full funding of what we need, along with this levy, it could all sort of come together. On the other hand, waiting until November next year makes it a little bit more clear whether the legislature did come down, right? And did they fully fund from the perspective we think, or did they short schools and pass an education budget that required cuts, which could then change the dynamic a little bit in terms of what we're putting out in November. So I think we should, as Julie I think is trying to set up with this conversation for next time, I think we should put all those options on the table and really explore the pros and cons of them, because I think there are pros and cons.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Andrew, like the 2 May elections, like we will be in the legislative session, but like this May of 23 will be in the long one, and there'll just be less known. But those are.
Yeah, we may not know the number in May.
Yeah. And if
The
just,
legislature.
again, this is just for the sake of everybody's just getting you thinking about the framework and our timelines. We did provide, say if we chose one of the first 2 elections, either May of 2023 or November 2023, these are like the deadlines by which we'd have to do work. Like by next February, if we want to go in May of 2023,
You'd have to do my favorite
there'd be a
place.
whole host of actions, a lot of it behind the scenes. I mean, just getting things ready, but for the board to refer. But as you can see, then we, then you're kind of in a sprint once you refer. You're got the voters pamphlet statement due, and raise the money. Well, you should have been raising the money, starting at the beginning of the year. So but these are the ones where staff will be submitting things that if they're not submitted, there's no referral.
And these are just election referral deadlines. This is not including any community engagement or PTA engagement
Or the
or a
TC
campaign.
Yeah.
TSCC.
Yeah, the TSCC.
And but just so these are like, without these, there is no referral.
Now, who's doing this on this 50-yard dash? Is that us?
Would it-
Once we make a referral, regardless of when we do it, whether it's this one or the next one, are the meetings that you were just referring to, are we the ones hosting those meetings, putting those meetings together?
Generally, that's what the tradition has been, is that the board has, like in conjunction with campaign staff, but for example, the board has gone and done presentation at individual schools or gone to meet with different stakeholder groups. because staff, there's
There's a firewall a bit at a certain point.
yeah, and there are limitations on what staff can do versus what board members can do. And so board members have the most flexibility. So
In your unpaid volunteer role, you have more flexibility.
like for example,
Hear that, Gary? I'm flexible.
so for example, in the bond, members of the board went to the back to school nights for their, like, the schools in their cluster.
I do that already.
Perfect. Then you can just like, you'll have a
Slide
slide
deck.
you'll have a
Yeah.
slide deck and you'll like,
Talk about the impacts and the benefits of the
Right.
local option.
Okay.
and we'll make sure that everybody understands like what's allowed and
I definitely need that.
Yeah.
I definitely.
well, we recognize like, so some board members, depending on when we go, but some board members will have been through an election cycle already and other ones won't. So we'll just want to make sure everybody has the same set of information about what we can do and also like what we can ask staff to do and what we can't ask staff to do.
We send reminders out to staff as well.
Yeah.
And what they can and can't do.
Okay, so we know what the referral dates are. Again, this is all just like, I'm sure you're going to make a binder, this all in, so you've got.
I just downloaded it on the
Okay.
It's a good idea.
It's an electronic binder.
It's all in my Adobe
Good
file
idea.
right
Make a
here.
binder. I
Okay,
I don't know why I didn't think of that before.
Binder.
so then we have like the next agenda item is like the different components. So we've talked a little bit about the purpose, like do we want it to all be teachers or something else? So that would be a recommendation for this, from this committee to the full board. The tax rate, again, that will be informed because the tax rate says how much you can raise by the discussion we have with Carol. The election date, we already just talked through that. There may be other considerations, and I think Gary's raised one of them. For example, do we want to have, can the internal auditor validate versus CBRC? But
What I just said, funds will be placed on sub-account and a yearly audit will review the expenditures to verify funds. I mean, that's kind of what I thought, but.
yeah, so this, my sense is there haven't been a lot of changes in the past, but if there's anything in here, like, I mean, another thing would be, other considerations may be, this, like, if we did do teachers, this, what are we guaranteeing as sort of the average? Because those are all things that we can talk about. We'll also expect staff to come with a point of view or a recommendation.
So, and Julia, maybe now is a good time, just again, I think this is for future meeting conversation, but I'm really interested in the board this year having a conversation about, exactly these things and particularly around the tax rate. And I think really, and it's a conversation with us as a board, but also really with the community. And there's a lot of complicating factors, and this is maybe going to get a little bit into sort of what information board members need, for these future meetings. There is a politically, we're at $1.99 per thousand. So anything above that is a tax increase. So politically, we need to take that into account. There is also a state cap, and Courtney has tried to walk me through this, and Carol Samuel says I continue to forget the details, but there is a state cap that limits what we can go up to. That is also something we could ask the state legislature to remove. And so there's another piece of this that if we were interested in a substantial increase in this levy, what does that look like in terms of lobbying the legislature? But then also, what does that look like in terms of getting it passed, right? I mean, this is the trade-off of I'm very confident that going back out for a tax renewal to continue to fund a minimum of 825 teachers in our schools, a good campaign, continued fiscal diligence on the school district, we're going to pass that levy. At the same time, maybe our community is really interested in, instead of funding 825, they're interested in funding 1,500 teachers, right? And if that's the case, and I'm totally making that number up, I want to be really clear.
Just saying, when you said that, we just got our tax bill. So when you said that, I'm just noticing my tax bill just shoot right up.
You feel it, right? You feel it, and you know, Gary, if you're a no on this, we're in trouble. But
so
I
it's
think
a great point, Andrew. That's the discussion I want to have at the next meeting, and it will interplay with a lot of other things because, for example, Carol may say you could do that, but you'd have to wait for the 2023 legislature to act on it. In which case, you'd need to wait to the November 2023.
Yes.
So all
And
these things.
that's assuming that the legislature would do that for us. And I'm just raising that because schools are flush with cash. It's not true. We know that.
Getting a reduction.
But I just think we'll do everything we can. It's happened before. They've raised the limits for us 4 years ago. It's not, unheard of, but we can't. Right now, there's a lot that's going to change. A lot of people are getting elected, right? New people coming to the legislature that don't know anything about education finance. We're going to have our work cut out for us. But the levy is confusing because the way that there's a threshold in statute that we were able to raise 4 years ago to keep a little more money here and not hand it back to the state to equalize, with other districts. And it was kind of we called it a technical fix. It worked. It was a good message. But that particular legislator who helped do that is retiring, so she won't be there. So I just want us to be really realistic that will be a difficult thing to communicate. I think it's possible. I just want us to know.
There's another way to raise more money, but it requires a change to the Constitution, which would be a referral to the voters. Anyway, let's hold that discussion for next week because it's the right discussion, Andrew, because I think you don't want to hey, do the easy thing, and then people are like, hey, how come you didn't
try for more?
Or, why are we cutting teachers? So...
I hear you, Andrew. The citizens could be like, let's fund more teachers. Yeah, I agree. They could. The appetite could be. I think a lot of it is going to just be around the messaging, right?
We heard from a lot of our community this year about class sizes. And, and they said, we think class sizes of 32, 33, 34 are too many. And okay. And if that's the way the bulk of our community feels, then the only way to reduce class sizes is through additional teachers. We certainly I'll speak for myself. I don't want to shift resources from the things and classroom supports and other things that we as a district are doing to raise student achievement. But if that's something that the community desires and they're willing to pay more in taxes for it, then maybe there is a kind of a win-win solution here. That gets us to that point. That's and the reason I raise it, Julia, is yes, I know we're gonna have the conversation in the future. This also gets to the stakeholder engagement, right? How do we ask this question of our community to sort of get a sense from them of what they're willing to support, and not just support to say, oh yeah, I support it, but to support meaning to go out and lobby for it and get their neighbors to vote and do all the things that would be needed, because a tax increase is a lot harder to pass than a tax renewal, period.
Yep. Great. So we'll have some key things that we'll need to make specific recommendations around: purpose, rate, election date, average teachers per year, internal auditors versus validation versus CBRC. So those are going to be the elements of our deliverable in addition to the timing. So I'm going to move this number 6, what information do committee members need, down to the end, because I'm going to go to the other ones, and we'll just end with what people, if there's anything they want for the next meeting. So the next item was it's a blank matrix, and this is something from Jonathan, but I wanted just to start the discussion because we're going to need to. There'll be a point in time, whenever we go, where we're going to need to go have conversations with tiers of stakeholders, and there'll be some, this is a huge stakeholder group, and this is maybe one where a second round of stakeholders. There may be some that we inform and other ones that we consult. So I wanted to just do a quick ideation from everybody of groups that you think that we need to engage. And I'll just start with, like, I'd say all the labor groups.
So just a quick question. Since we've done this before, don't we already have a list of folks that we've done this with already?
So
That was gonna be my question. Where's the ones from last time?
not necessarily. I'd say from last time, there was a conversation informally with PAT, and I say we had informed conversations like after we referred, but it wasn't like we went out and sought people's point of view, and especially if my viewpoint is I think it's better to talk to our major stakeholders before you refer, out of respect. Because once you refer, then it's like, well, you already made a decision. Don't ask. Why are you asking me now? And especially if we went for a higher rate, if that's something the board wants to do, then I do think it is going to require a lot more intensive set of discussions.
So we don't have a list.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess I'm just,
I mean, we have a list of like all
Yeah.
the PTAs and.
I guess I'm just not seeing a group that's going to say, no, we don't want more teachers. I'm just not seeing it. And if they are, is that a big enough group to engage with of those that saying, no, we don't want to continue with or have as much teachers? I guess that's what it says. If we know there's going to be a general consistency, do we use our time efficiently in a different way? Are there a bigger picture of why we want to engage them, maybe for something down the road? I want to know what's the plan, what's the play here?
Yeah.
Because I just don't see too many people saying, no, we don't want to have more teachers or the current number of teachers in our schools.
Well, here's what I recommend doing it. First of all, if it's anything besides the plain vanilla, just like straight renewal, what we've done, then you could get by doing less. But the thing is, like the school board and district staff are not going to on their own like just submit voters pamphlet statements and everything else. Is like what makes a successful campaign is having PAT submit something, have
Right.
the district council of students submit something, have the local businesses submit voter pamphlet statements. And generally, as somebody who gets asked to sign a lot of voter pamphlet statements, I'm usually like, I would have liked to have had a conversation before you just referred it and then came and said, like, will you support this?
But do you still support it?
Pardon?
But do you still support it is the question.
It depends.
No, let's look at this one. So say we did this, we say, oh, we know we already recommended it, but we would love to get a statement from you. Would this something you'll be like, you know what, y'all didn't talk to me about it first.
No, because like
It's
I
for
wrote
the
this.
kids.
Right. It's like, no, I hear what you say. I just want to make sure that if we're going to be spending time and effort, and especially since you said these are going to be board members who's going to be going out having these conversations, I want to make sure my time is focused on a plan of action that is really valid.
And I think to your point, it
not
will matter what direction you
definitely.
take. If you do look at an increase,
Yeah, right.
then you're gonna wanna do more surveying, polling, to know, do they have an appetite to see an increase in their property taxes? Because to your point, like, people have seen a big increase over the years, but not because it's an increase in certain ones, but there's new stuff coming online. So that's gonna be, some people will say yes to anything because it's for kids. Or their kids are in the schools or their grandkids are in the schools.
Yeah.
And some people will have a hard time with with a new tax or an increased tax. So it'll depend on what people, what you're hearing from surveys.
And
But
like
historically-
when we go ask somebody for,
But we have historical data, right, as far as when we look at tax increases, right? Historically, if we look at the historical data, do it usually show passing or not passing? And is that depending on what the increase is for? So we're looking at increases for, or even when they added the tax levy,
Yeah.
that was an increase. What is the likelihood historically of it not passing versus passing? I mean, that's the kind of data I
think
would
with
want
our
to
local-
see.
We've always passed our local option.
I'm gonna get you survey data from 2019 that we did. See, because we did ask some questions, and you can see, and again, it's 2019, but you can see the type of questions we ask. So the other thing, in addition to like letters, pamphlet statements, and everything else, is like you have to fund a campaign, and
Yeah, I know how that goes.
generally, like it's like who is going to go ask for the resources?
We have all our pastors.
Pardon?
We have all our pastors.
Pass the plate. Anyway, so for me, I would want to have conversations with our labor partners. I would say, and this isn't like second tier, but there's just so many of them, and there's smaller groups, is like the PTAs, and they're a stakeholder later in the process. It may be the Portland Council of PTAs. I would also want to go talk to the Portland Business Alliance, because they often are funders, and their members are funders. I think the last local option, it was mostly businesses that contributed to the campaign and PAT.
Ironically, just got an interesting text from somebody relevant to all of this from Jerry Wright.
Oh, really?
Just randomly right now. So weird.
That's,
Yeah.
So, do you have anyone?
Business for a Better Portland is another
yeah,
group to
great.
talk to.
I said business associations, so I figured that's going to be that. Is this something we go out and get endorsements for too, as far as like from the governor or whoever? So okay, so endorsements. I'm assuming this is just like a regular campaign that.
So then,
regardless.
then we got to go after the faith community.
Well,
So we need to, because I still feel like the church is the center nucleus of all of our communities.
Yeah, we want the support of, what makes our community strong is having strong schools, and, among lots of things, but, and we can't have strong schools if we don't have enough adults to help us in those schools, right?
Yep.
and I was just thinking too, and this goes to what Andrew was talking about, with COVID happening, and, the lost education piece that a lot of people are talking about, that might be an appetite for folks to dig a little deeper. Even though I don't want to, but to dig a little deeper, because we have that issue out there, right? And so that could be one of the points that we make, because that's the argument already. So let's use that argument to say, okay, you're right. This is an issue, and this is one of the ways that we can help remedy that.
Do people understand that we have seen a reduction in state funding for the last 10 years?
I don't think they understand at that level, like the level of,
So was it like Levy 5 or something like that?
Measure 5.
Measure 5.
so that's why the levy exists in the first place.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Measure 5 happened. So if a lot of people don't understand that, how much time have we spent explaining to people that, or sharing with people, helping people understand that? Because if they see schools as this, this cash cow that has all this money and is so lucrative, and yet we as a school district are saying, wait a minute, we've actually been getting less and less over the last 10 years. So we've had to, although it seems like we're doing stuff, we've been cutting out, making small incremental cuts every year for 10 years, and it just hasn't been as noticeable, because you move a piano 6 inches at a time, and then the next thing you know, they don't know that the piano's in the hallway, because they got used to it moving. And I think that's what's happening with us as a school district, we've been getting less and less, so 6 inches at a time. And before you know it, it's like, wait a minute, we don't have enough to turn the lights on. And people don't understand that.
But I think when people are looking at the cash cow piece, or at least from the public standpoint, they're not seeing the piano moving. What they're seeing is the company we're hiring to move the piano. So they see like the executive contracts.
Mhm.
They see those things and they're thinking, well, they should be fine because there's one employee or two employees or three employees out of, well, how many, 3,000, 8,000 employees are at this number. So that's what they're
Right.
seeing, not knowing that the operating expenses is what is really
Driving the
driving the cost. All they've seen is the flash. Well, he came up here in a Rolls Royce.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the
but he
same,
lives in an
That's why they
apartment.
say he got a new
Right, but he's living in an apartment, right?
but it's the same conversation that's happening in Salem around, hey, we know you think you've done a lot, and you have. We're grateful for the Student Success Act.
Yeah.
We got some ESSER one-time money,
Yeah.
money. And we've been, this has been going on since 1990 when Measure 5 passed. We've just been making up for it locally. Thankfully, we are lucky. There's only 18 or 20 local option levies out of 197 school districts. We're one of the places that, has a voter base that supports schools. There are places that cannot pass a bond or a levy. And so we're fortunate. And people think that because we have that, we're doing so much better, but really we're just making up for what the state couldn't do over 20 years.
Is May 23rd? Is that after? That's after the election, ain't it?
Is that what?
The election is now. I'm talking about with registrators, legislators.
That was this
That's happening in November 8th.
November. Yeah. So that would be
So that would have
fresh
been
after.
over.
But it'd be right in the middle of us beginning our.
So how do we lobby, especially some of these new
Elected
legislators,
officials.
to look at the funding model for?
So that's the intergovernmental committee.
Okay.
Different conversation, but it's relevant.
Right.
And we're going to be starting in a pretty rough spot going into this next session. This current service level conversation has not been that fruitful. It's a wonky technical conversation, but the current service level is the roll-up cost, right? Where do you start in the next biennium? Do you start flat at the same level, or do you go up a little bit? They usually start a little higher, but it's not nearly enough, and that's what we're hearing is going to be the starting point. We also don't know who our governor is going to be. We have no governor's recommended budget. We won't have one until February. That's kind of unique, right? We don't
Okay,
usually
before
have
we
that.
get too far.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I wanna-
Action.
We're on a time crunch
Sure,
here.
we're on a time crunch.
Sorry.
So-
We can talk about this.
Let's go back. Yeah, let's go back.
So I'm gonna,
Stakeholders.
so I think I've got like a beginning list. What I'd ask all the committee members is like send your ideas and just copy Courtney and myself. And we'll just like be building a list, okay?
So I'll just add one more list. What about students? Our students.
Oh, yeah. The students were actually great last time and with the bond.
And the DSC's really engaged and
They want some more to do.
they want stuff.
Speaking of that, I asked Byrony for a student representative on
They
this
haven't named them
on this committee, and she said she was going to do it 2 weeks ago.
I don't think it's happened yet.
Okay.
But I know it hasn't.
I think they're still in the.
We're still figuring it out.
Yeah, they're still figuring out who's going to.
Getting
Okay.
organized.
Anyway, we'd love to have one because
Shelter.
great call out. Anything else, Andrew? Okay.
No.
Can I just make one quick plug?
Yeah.
There is an intergovernmental committee meeting next Wednesday, and among the items we're talking about is our legislative agenda, kind of our draft, just discussion draft. So, and of course, funding is the big elephant in the room. So I know you aren't on the committee, but if you want to tune in or come, it's at 1:00 next Wednesday, the 24th, 26th, whatever day next Wednesday is.
So this is I probably won't be there. But if there's something, a task that you want me to do, I am happy to do it. Just give me a task and
We
something
will.
to do.
We're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, that meeting will just be talking about.
I
One
didn't say
task.
it.
One
Well,
task.
especially when you're not there to.
Yeah, just give me a task. If I need to go talk to someone,
Yeah, I didn't say that. That was.
just one
That was
task.
him.
I can't. You're putting in my hands.
He's not here. Let's give him a
So there's a couple other things that I didn't build into the timeline, but we also have to do. So there's some things, other things required by law that's not required by the elections division. Like we have to do a tax supervising commission public hearing. So there are some mechanical things that are required by law that has to happen with by the board for the referral. And then once the referral happens, then it really does flip into almost all the campaign, and that's where also the board is very central because we can do a lot more than other people's can. So we're going to be building out this timeline so everybody can see exactly when we have to do these different pieces.
Is this when we have our meetings with like our state representatives and our?
No, that would be more. They're more stakeholders.
So our state representatives like Janelle Bynum, Frederick.
Janelle actually doesn't have any of PPS, but she's obviously an important stakeholder in our conversation about funding at the state level. Maybe not as much on the local option because she doesn't represent.
Like Senator Fredericks.
But yeah.
I haven't talked to him.
Yeah, and he's reached out about Jefferson this week, and so folks are reaching. They're out there. They're waiting to help.
And that's because they've been in the community since day one.
I know.
I mean, you're talking about the day one. So they're reaching out because they know these families, and the families are reaching out to them, and so they're in turn calling us back. So,
I mean, also, a reason why we would have conversations with legislators in the Portland delegation is they also were all very supportive financially. To make a lot of them have been parents of kids, or they have our PPS schools in their boundaries, so they've been helpful just on the providing campaign, like signing voters' pamphlet statements, but also contributing to the measures of bonds.
How much does this cost?
A campaign.
Yeah, for this.
Yeah, so it depends. Again, if you increase the rate, it's a way different campaign than just a renewal. So I want to say we spent 130
That sounds right.
in 2019, and it ended with like a $40,000 deficit. That in the 2020 bond, the first thing we did before we raised any money for the bond campaign is we committed to
Pay off that.
pay off the debt, because the debt was to the campaign consultant that ran the campaign. I mean, it should never end.
Okay, so
It should never end with
we're
the
looking
debt.
at 130K just for a regular one, and
It
then
was like 170. I want to say.
170 if we
I
do
can get the
increase.
materials,
Okay.
but I don't know that we should be having that conversation.
Yeah, that's a
in,
campaign conversation.
Oh, that's not the committee question.
It's just
that's more
it's
of a campaign.
sensitive because it's
But I can get you the
political
data.
campaign stuff and
Everybody's
board
sensitive.
stuff.
Everybody's so sensitive.
Like,
Everybody's
don't want
so
you to get in
sensitive.
trouble.
It's like don't talk about politics. Don't talk about
if they get in
politics.
trouble, what they gonna do?
Ask me about what I ate
Fire
last
us.
night. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk about politics.
Well, you can, but there have been in the past, like, staff got fined for some things that happened during, I want to say the 2014
Bond.
Yeah.
the 2014 bond. So it's a great question. I'll provide you
Okay.
data.
And
we
generally
could go have
staff-
a long conversation about the
Once a measure has been referred, staff are like,
Hands
can't.
off.
Yep.
It's like,
to some extent.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to wrap up. So the last thing I would need to ask somebody is like, what other base materials would be helpful for the committee to have before or for our next meeting?
So I think just getting back to those earlier questions, what's the existing cap in state law, and is there any room there? That's something that I'd be interested in seeing.
Okay, this is the whole Carol
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah. And one other question, this is more, this isn't so much information, and I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for this, but I'd be curious historically, has either PPS or frankly any other district, have they ever run two levies at the same time to say, here's a measure that would extend the existing levy, and here's a measure that would increase in addition to that? So it's kind of a technical question about whether that's allowed, but it is also a political question as to whether that's wise or foolish. I can make a strong argument that it's foolish, but I can also make the counter argument. So
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Because then you don't jeopardize the whole thing. And it does put more pressure because it may be easier for people to say, hey, I can vote against the increase, but
As a risk averse person, I like it.
but I think it's a great question. I will ask Liz to get an answer to that so we can talk about that, because that could be another option.
You're gonna give me an option to have higher taxes or not higher taxes?
I mean, what you're really doing is saying,
All
look,
right, I'll vote for it.
what you're really doing is you're saying, look, the
Status
renewal
quo.
of the existing tax, that's non-negotiable. No, I like you said, Gary, nobody's going to oppose. Nobody's going to want to fire a thousand teachers, right? The question about a tax increase to may reduce class sizes, more teachers, whatever, it's going to be more controversial. So if you combine them, you're hoping that the support for the base tax carries over to the new tax, but you put the whole thing at risk. If you separate them, you probably put the tax increase at more risk, but you also make the question really clear to your voters.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no, I get it. I like that idea though.
I thought we as a district got some of that weed money.
We get a very small portion. And
I thought that got then ultimately diverted to the 110.
I don't know if it all did. I gotta go back and look.
And like the lottery money too. Don't we get some of that too?
We do, but
Okay,
it gets,
I think this is more of an
yeah, we can talk about it.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's right.
It show next week.
We should be getting all kind of money.
Okay, so Andrew has a question. Is there any other data that relates to the referral?
Is there a like a threshold, like a percentage? Like, we know that if we increase by X number of percent, people are okay, but if you go above that, then they lose their mind. So like, is there just numbers? Like if
Public opinion about.
if we go up 3%, people are okay. You go up 3.5 or 4, and they shut the whole thing down. Like,
That's where the survey would come in handy,
Okay.
to kind of list out those thresholds and see where people land. Get a sample of people that say one thing or the other.
Okay,
And I did
anything
email
else?
all of you, just for background, it's very technical, but it's the one pager from the 2018 bill that we passed that just explains what we did.
Yeah, I just seen that.
We can talk about it with Carol.
It was a huge, well, my preference would be to everybody to read it if you have questions, like we don't have a committee discussion about it, because like, it was a
We can
huge,
spend an hour just on that.
well, it was a huge win, and it happened, but I don't, and it sets us up well.
Yeah.
But I don't know that we need to.
Yeah, that's why I sent it to you. If you have questions, you can email me.
Great, thank you, everybody, thank you, staff.
This is happening.